Every parent has heard about the sleep regressions, but there is one sleep regression that when parents hear about it, it sends shivers down their spine, and that is the 4-month sleep regression. Doesn't matter if your baby was a fantastic sleeper, like 2 months old, sleeping through the night, or maybe he was a medium, level sleeper. When the 4-month sleep regression actually hits, we can go from sleeping through the night to waking up every 45 minutes. And the thing is, the sleep regression, the 4-month sleep regression, is not actually a regression. It is a misnomer. And it is not a temporary thing. It is a permanent change in the way that your baby sleeps. And so before you freak out and you think, oh my God, did you say permanent? Like, what am I gonna do now? I can't wake up every 45 minutes. There is a solution to this, but you need to understand what's actually happening here and why it's a misnomer and not a traditional sleep regression, which is usually temporary, yes. Before 4 months, babies do not sleep in sleep cycles. They go from like light sleep to deep sleep, and they really transition very quickly, and they'll stay in deep sleep anywhere between 30 minutes to 4 hours. There's no predictable patterns. That's why your baby typically doesn't have a schedule and follows wake windows instead. And that's why you might have a baby that's giving you naps that are like 3.5 hours long that are, really fantastic. But as your baby turns 4 months, and we say 4 months, but keep in mind, a 4-month sleep regression can happen at 3 months, it can happen at 5 months. It's really an average, and this applies to any sleep regression, truly. What happens during this sleep regression is they actually start sleeping in cycles like we do. And so when we sleep, we enter light sleep 1, we transition to light sleep 2, we transition to deep sleep 1, and then deep sleep 2, and REM, which is that rapid eye movement sleep you've heard about where all the dreams happen, and then we transition slowly out all the way up to light sleep, and then we cycle back, right? We will typically do about 5 of these cycles per night, and as we approach the morning hours, our sleep cycles actually become less deep, and so we won't get, let's say, deep sleep 2 anymore in those last 2 cycles, but we'll get, deep sleep 1. In between each of those sleep cycles, which last anywhere between 45 minutes to 90 minutes, when we are in that phase of light sleep, our brains actually partially wake up. So you won't open your eyes, you won't remember that you did it, but your brain will assess if your environment is still safe for you to dive into the next sleep cycle. Are there any weird sounds? Am I too cold? Am I in pain? Do I have to pee really, really bad? And if everything checks out, we're just gonna go back to sleep into the next sleep cycle, and that's great. And if something was wrong, let's say, your husband started snorting beside you, you'll wake up and then you'll adjust the situation before you go back to sleep, right? That is what we call an environmental check. And it's based on evolution, right? When you were sleeping out in the woods or in the jungle, many hundreds of years ago, it was a smart thing for you to sort of like take a pause between sleep cycles and know, is there a tiger close by? Is it safe for me to fall back asleep, or do I need to like run, right? So we don't necessarily need to do that anymore, but we still do it. And babies start doing the same thing at 4 months. The difference is some babies don't adapt to it very well. And so instead of just partially waking up, they end up fully waking up. And then you end up having to do the dance to get them to fall back asleep. So maybe that's nursing or feeding them back to sleep, bouncing up and down, walking around the house, singing songs, bouncing on an exercise ball, whatever it is that you do to get your baby to fall back asleep. And then once you've gotten them back to sleep, you put them back in your bed, you climb into your bed, And then 45 minutes, 90 minutes later, maybe a little bit more if you're lucky, they wake up again, and you end up having to do the same thing over and over again. And as a result of that, both your sleep and their sleep becomes more and more superficial, meaning you're not getting that deep sleep. You're really just getting that light sleep, stage 1 and 2. And so you both wake up in the morning, and what happens? You're still tired. As a result, your baby fights his naps, which means that by bedtime, he's like really overtired, and then he fights bedtime, which causes him to sleep even more superficially at night. And so we end up in this horrifying cycle that we call the cycle of overtiredness. And so when you're stuck in there, trying to find your way out can be very difficult. We always say we have to throw a wrench in the cycle at just the right place to break it. What you really need to take from this is a permanent change in the way that your baby sleeps. So it's not going to stop. It's permanent. And so the sleep disruption that you're seeing is likely to continue. And with every single sleep regression, even those that truly are temporary, the disruptor that causes the wake-ups at night might be temporary, but if you don't act on the consequence, if you don't act on those wakes, what tends to happen is, although the sleep regression stops, the wake-ups become sort of set in stone, set in cement, right? They become permanent in themselves. And so if you don't deal with the 4-month sleep regression, and you don't deal with the 9-month sleep regression, and you don't deal with the 12-month sleep regression, you end up with compounding sleep regressions, which is basically a giant sandwich of sleep disruptors. And then you need to figure out on your own how to undo this. It can get really complicated and really, really confusing. So what can you do about it? Well, there's a few things, and it depends on what age your child is. So if your child's dealing with the 4-month sleep regression, for example, we need to figure out what are some of the disruptors that might be amplifying that sleep regression and those impacts on sleep, and what we need to do in order to reverse it. But if your child's older and we have a few sleep regressions that have compounded on each other, then what we need to do is we need to have a conversation. We need to go over the sleep history to figure out, okay, well, what caused each and every one of those sleep disruptions for you, and which ones are still in place, and what should we do about that? Because for your child, it might be separation anxiety. For another child, it might be those environmental checks that were never, truly fixed. For another child, it might be simply the fact that they're learning to walk, and that is a lot of learning to do at the same time. So we really need to have a good conversation to figure out, what are my child's sleep disruptors? Like, what is causing all of this? Do we have compounding, sleep regressions? And then create a plan based on that. So what I would invite you to do, if you're watching this and you're like, oh my God, my child definitely has that 4-month sleep regression, or worse, I have a sandwich of them, then you need to book a call so that we can have that conversation together, so we can figure out what it is that we need to do. Now, if your baby's 2 months old and you're watching this, then you knowing that this is ahead of you is fantastic, because now you can lay solid sleep foundations to hopefully prevent the sleep regressions from having much of an impact at all, because you can't prevent the sleep regression, but you can mitigate the impact that it will have on your baby's sleep. And so we actually have a free sleep seminar. We do it every month. It's called the Peace of Mind Parenting Seminar, and you can find the link right below. And in that sleep seminar, we will actually help you figure out what the sleep disruptors are for your children, but we will walk through every single sleep regression that happens between 0 to 2.5 years old, so that you can figure out what it is that you're actually dealing with, and you'll get some one-on-one help as you go through it as well.